Okay, so now we're live.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. I could always edit
Okay.
it out.
Okay. All right. Well, what the secret Hogan's secret kind of gets muddled up a little bit because he had a lot of things that he didn't tell people, or he did, or if you speak to some of the folks who are close to him, he swore them to secrecy about certain technique. So there's there are those secrets, and then there is the secret of his success. What was it? What was it that Hogan did that was different, that set him apart? And those are completely different topics than what Hogan identified as the secret 1955. And if you want to talk in that particular secret, he did divulge, I think, enough of it that people can understand it. Perhaps because is readily available, people aren't convinced it's the secret, and it isn't it isn't the only secret. But if folks want to understand what Hogan called his secret and revealed in 1955, that's relatively easy to do. So maybe we should start with the history of how that 1955 article in Life magazine came about. Well, when Hogan joined the tour back in the late 30s, he was moderately successful, but he couldn't win. And he was well regarded in 38, well regarded in 39, but it had gotten to the point by the beginning of 1940, he was being viewed as a perennial bridesmaid. And one of the issues he had was, his drives tended to overdraw. He didn't really suffer from terrible snap hooks. He suffered from a drive that just got away from him a little bit, and enough to get into trouble when he was under pressure. And that obviously bothered the heck out of him because he was very competitive when he wanted to win, and he was getting very frustrated in the early part of 1940 that he wasn't winning. And I think during the winter tour, he finished second three times until he got to the North South, which was a tournament held in March. And at that tournament, his friend from Fort Worth, Byron Nelson, had just received two drivers from McGregor, two custom-made drivers from McGregor, which he tried out in the driving range. And one of them he didn't like, and he offered it to Hogan, and Hogan loved it. And Hogan used it in the tournament, raved about it in post-round interviews, said the club felt perfect in his hands. The ball went straight as an arrow, and he wound up setting a record score at the North-South to win his first tournament. And the North-South was a pretty important tournament at that time. It was probably a second-tier major. I mean, not as important as the Masters or the U.S. Open or the PGA, but maybe similar to the Western Open. So for Hogan went from being an also ran before the North South to quickly dominating the tour. He won the first three events he played with that driver, and then uh, won I guess the fourth out of five. So he won four events in 1940. Was the leading money winner and won the Bard Trophy. And by the end of 1941, he repeated that. He won five events, I think, in 1941. Who again was the leading money winner, and also won the Bard Trophy. And by the end of 1941, he kind of caught up with Byron Nelson as being considered the best on tour. That driver, and then in 1942, he did the same thing, except that the year was a bit shorter, but I believe he won six tournaments was again leading money winner, and would have won the Varden Trophy if they had awarded one. But because of the World War II, they kept the stat, and he had the lowest stroke average, but he didn't get the title because the title wasn't given. So this driver really turned Hogan's career around. You can see it in his bag or on the tee in a lot of press photographs. And what's distinctive about this driver was it was finished in all black, and the face, including the face, was black. And that's something McGregor did with some of its models in the 1940s. So that driver was still visible in his bag after World War II in 1946. And in January of 1947, the driver broke. It broke during the Pro-Am at the Phoenix Open. And Hogan had anticipated that it might break, and he had asked McGregor to make an identical copy for him, but it had taken them literally 25 tries to get a driver that he thought felt as good as the original. And so when the original driver broke in January 47, he put the replacement into play, but unfortunately the replacement didn't work. And so if you're familiar with Hogan's career, you know that 1946 was really his breakout year. He won 13 times, again the leading money winner, again the Ward Trophy winner, and but in 1947 he wound up third on the money list behind Demerit and Bobby Locke, and I also believe third in stroke average. Bobby Locke, I believe, had the lowest stroke average, but he wasn't a PGA Tour member, so he didn't get the Varden Trophy. Demerit did. So for the first time since the early 50s, Hogan wasn't the top dog on tour. And try as he might in 1947, he couldn't find a replacement driver. The ones that McGregor made, didn't work. And he even wound up borrowing drivers from other players to see if it would work. And it got to the point that there's a very interesting locker room interview that took place prior to the U.S. Open, and his peers are actually making fun of him. Hogan's complaining that he can't find the driver that he likes, and Middlecoff is saying, "Well, that's just fine by us. You've for so long. That's just too bad, Ben." So here was the dilemma. Hogan couldn't make any driver he tried work, and he didn't want to change his swing, but he was eventually forced to change his swing because he wasn't playing the way he wanted to. And if you look at his record in 47, it was marked by one bad round in a tournament, and he really didn't compete in any of the majors. He won half a dozen regular events, but he wasn't very competitive in the majors. So it got to the point where Hogan decided in September of 1947 to leave the tour and see if he could find a swing change that would work. Work with whatever drivers he had was available.
This is 19.
This is 47, and that's a good question because in the articles, I just went back and took a look at the articles. In the articles, he says he discovered the secret in 1946, and he gives the same date in 5 lessons. And in 1946, he wasn't struggling at all, and so he says in these articles in 55 that he was in a crisis because of the hook. But in 1946, he wasn't in a crisis. He was winning every other event. So, it's an open question whether that was just an honest mistake, or was for some reason Hogan decided that he wanted to tell people the switch was made in 46. Yeah, I don't know, but it's well documented from newspaper articles that he uh, given in 1947, late in 1947, that he did take time off, did think about what sort of swing changes, what might make sense. And he stumbled upon two or three swing changes, which transformed his game, transformed his driving from, an, a hook an unpredictable hook. And I think it was the unpredictable nature of the hook that bothered Hogan as much as anything, not so much the hook itself. And as he describes in the Life magazine article, he had tried out these new swing changes, and they worked very well. And they worked so well that he won the first tournament he entered after when he returned to the tour. One of the Tam O'Shanter events that William May sponsored. There was a limited field event, and 36 holes, and he won that event handily. And he took most of the rest of that year off to rest and to continue to hone the fade. Hogan then first discussed this change in an interview that was published on December 26, 1947. And he says, he kind of candidly says, I've changed my game from a draw off the tee, which I've always done, to a fade. And I feel like I'm going to have my best year ever, 1948. I'm so confident in this new game. And so that was the first public disclosure that he'd made the change. And at that time, it really wasn't a secret. I mean, he said, I made the change. I made it when I left the tour in the fall of 47. I used it when I won at Tam O'Shanter. I'm using it now. And let's just see how it goes. Right now, I'm very confident. And I think it's going to be my best year.
So
And 48 was his best year.
okay. So let's double back just a little bit. So is
Sure.
the technique would be described as a cupping of the left wrist, weakening of the left hand grip, and it's got an supposedly old Scottish technique called pronation. Is this
Right.
the gist of his secret?
That's what he describes in the 1955 Life magazine article. He says that he took pronation, which is rotating the hands, open on the backswing and rotating them closed on the downswing. He said pronation by itself would cause a hook. So pronation wasn't the solution. The solution was to weaken his grip, as you mentioned, and then to cup the left wrist in the course of the backswing and get it cupped at the top of the top. Hogan did a demonstration of that on the Ed Sullivan Show the week after the article was published in Life magazine, and it's a very interesting segment because Hogan says at the end of the article that this technique would not help the ordinary golfer, and it would ruin a bad golfer because the club face was so open. Those golfers would never get the club face closed, and they'd hit either a terrible slice or even a shake. So he was actually a very kind of contrite in this segment on the Ed Sullivan Show, because he said, don't go out and try this at home. And then what's particularly interesting for today, he said, if you're a slicer, use pronation, but use a flat wrist. And in fact, what he actually demonstrated was a cupped left wrist. So a bowed left wrist, become very fashionable
Right.
in the last couple of years. Well, there he demonstrates. He says, do this and pronate and do this. And once you become a hooker like me, then you can adopt the secret to control the hook.
Okay. So now in 5 lessons, see, we get, and the feedback we've been getting throughout, but
Well, let's say in 5 lessons, he really doesn't talk about it. I mean, the only element that he talks about is how he weakened his grip. And he does say, I weakened my grip a little bit, but I consider that a personal modification, not necessarily something that everyone should. Um, and there were other things that he included in 5 lessons that he didn't do, which we could touch on a bit later. But getting back to 1947 and early 1948, here was the secret that he was openly discussing, and it wasn't a secret. And Hogan had a newspaper column, and he mentions this change in a couple of them in the of these newspaper columns, and in one of them he kind of goes into detail. It gives a little more background, which is kind of interesting.
well, that was fun.
He said that since his earliest days as a golfer, he would close the club face at the beginning of the downswing, and then when his timing was off, that became a hook. And he had found that as he'd gotten older and discovered in 1947, he couldn't control that hook anymore. Well, he could control the hook with the Byron Nelson driver, but the Byron Nelson driver had broken and he couldn't duplicate it. So since he'd searched high and low for a replacement driver, he couldn't find one that worked. He took the next step and made the swing changes. And I think if you study the pre and post secret swings, there may be some other differences that are apparent. He seemed like maybe he was using his legs a little more aggressively before the secret was disclosed. So maybe there were other elements that he adopted in his swing that he didn't talk about. But the big one was the cupping of the left wrist and the weakening of the grip and the rotating it open and rotating it closed. So he disclosed those details. He said in this February of 1948 column that he'd weakened the grip and he was opening the club face to the maximum, and it was working very well. You then fast forward to April of 1948, and that's when Power Golf was published. And Power Golf was written in 47 and was illustrated with pictures from 47. And as you know, having read Power Golf, there's no discussion of the secret in Power Golf. So here he was having disclosed his secret in the column and in newspaper interviews and so forth. And here he was bringing this book out to the market, but this new swing technique that he'd adopted in 1948, it wasn't in the book. So what does Hogan do? Hogan decides it's a secret. And that's when he starts saying, yes, I discovered this package of swing changes last fall, but I'm not going to tell anybody what it is. I mean, it's a improvement that's so important, I haven't even told my wife. Well, okay, that wasn't quite true. He disclosed most of it in his newspaper column, but beginning in April of 1948, when he was being interviewed about his new golf book, it becomes a secret. And it remains a secret really until 1955. And 1948 was a fabulous year, by far, one of the best ever. Well, he didn't win quite as many events as he won in 46, but he played fewer events. And he was suffering from some mysterious injuries, a mysterious back injury in the beginning of 1948. So he had some weaker finishes, had to withdraw some events. But once he got going, I think he started off with a win at the PGA, which was held earlier in the year in 1948. Then he won the U.S. Open, and then he won nearly every other tournament for the rest of the year. And so the secret became a hot topic. And people could tell he was fading, and they talked about the fade, they talked about the advantage of the fade, but they really didn't know how he was achieving that. So you get through 48, and interestingly enough, in one interview in 1948, after he won at the U.S. Open, he was asked, well, Ben, you won this tournament in fine record fashion, and you did it with the fade. And Hogan said, well, I made a change, but it wasn't a change to just fade the ball. I could fade the ball before. The change I made was to make the ball go higher in the air. And that's making the ball carry farther. He used to get much of his distance from run after the ball landed. But this change has actually helped me elevate the ball. So when it lands, it stays closer to its line of flight. And then he says, but I'm not going to tell you the details because, the details are too important. And anyhow, suffice it to say, I correct his swing fault with these swing changes.
I think
so. So the secret remained a topic of discussion through the end of 48, but then Hogan was in the accident, and focus then shifted from his recovery, and there really wasn't that much discussion of the secret through his recovery. The recovery was pretty much the focus of his conversation about Hogan's game. And it wasn't until the big year 53, the secret became a topic of discussion again.
re-entered the scene. But before we go to 53,
Sure.
and before we get to the accident, okay.
Yeah.
So I remember him saying, if there was a dog leg right in trees, he had to hit iron clubs because he couldn't even get a forward airborne. Now,
right.
He publishes Power Golf, right?
Yes.
He dedicates it to Henry Picard.
That's correct.
Henry Picard has no idea why Hogan dedicated this to him and why Hogan called him his best friend. However, there is a point somewhere in there where they're working together and he shows up. He tells Hogan that he can fix him, in a few minutes. And he just tells him to start slicing the shit out of the ball. I imagine that kind of advice would weaken his grip, and the whole secret thing would have been, So I want to know what do we know about Henry Picard's role in this and forward. I'm sorry.
Well, what we know is Hogan kind of dismisses the help that Picard gave him. I actually have it right here. He said he tried all the conventional cures: opening the face, weakening the grip, using more left arm, and cutting the ball. They all worked, but in the process, they cut down my distance by 5 to 10 yards. 5 yards is a long way. You can't give anybody 5 yards. You can't correct a fault with a fault. So to me, that's kicking Picard's advice to basically, cut the ball, slice the ball, kicking that to the curb.
Okay.
And there was Picard talks a bit about his work with Hogan. And if you look at the events, he actually gets the events kind of muddled up. He muddles up some years. He muddles up he muddles up quite a few things. I mean, it's actually enough for an article how memories are fallible. Pickard talks about working with Hogan at the 1940 North South when he and takes credit for that victory, but makes mistakes that you can verify through looking at different magazine articles and so forth.
So,
So, but and then to go back to the dedication, Hogan makes it clear why he dedicated Power Golf to Pickard. It was because Pickard
offer him backing, offer him money.
gave him confidence. Pickard said, "If you need, if you need help, I'm here." And and Hogan's very explicit that that was the reason he's dedicating the book to him. And he mentions in passing he also appreciated the swing tips, but the reason for the dedication was the boost of confidence it gave him at the Oakland Open in 1938, I believe.
Yes, that's when they stole his tires.
They stole his tires,
Yes.
exactly.
Yeah. So no, I was just because it's one of these things where you have like four sides of the story.
Yeah, right.
Picard says one thing, Hogan
Yeah,
probably thinking one thing, not knowing what this other guy's saying. At the same time, Picard's got, I think it's an offer to go to Inverness, and he needs to dump this Hershey Country Club job on somebody.
right.
And he's going way out of his way to recommend Ben Hogan, even though.
Well,
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I oh, okay. When they made that change, the top three golfers were Hogan, Snead, and Nelson. Nelson already had a club job that he loved, and so he wasn't available. Snead probably wasn't the right fit for Hershey. So really, Hogan was the only logical choice. I've heard people say things like Pickard got him the job. Well, I don't think Pickard got him the job. I think Pickard said, "Yeah, he's a terrific guy and would make a
Pickard
great
wanted a
choice."
replacement, so he can bail. So he could bail, I think.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
That's the way I see it.
well, be that as it may, I didn't see, you know, I didn't see Hogan as being that much of a stretch. I mean, he was very well regarded at his club in Westchester, and was one of the top,
Purchase.
two or three. It was in Purchase. It was I can't come up with the
The
name
guy,
with it.
the head pro there is the photographer from Mystique, Alexander.
Oh, Jules
Carl
Alexander.
Alexander's the head pro at that Century.
Wow. Century,
Yeah.
correct.
Yeah. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Okay. Well, I think we're sort of caught up. I mean, yeah, Pickard. I mean, there's a fellow who really loves Pickard and has written a book and describes Pickard's role. But if you go and look at the actually the newspaper record, he gets some things that just didn't happen because they years wrong.
Yeah, just because, again, just to unravel some of the myths and some of the myths and
Right.
thoughts and what's really going on with this secret, because others will lead you to Picard. As an aside, Life Horse Harry Cooper made some claims regarding the secret.
Well, what Cooper did was, and this is Cooper helped Hogan early in his career. This was he helped him in an event where he noticed that Hogan was letting go of the club at the top and told him to, hang on to the club at the top.
Playing the
And
piccolo.
Hogan did. And yeah, I think that's pretty much. Yeah, I think Hogan definitely was helped by that advice. It was, I mean, again, Harry. I mean, I've seen where Harry was quoted. And he says it was at New Orleans in a particular year. But if you look up that event and you look up the tee times of the paper, it doesn't quite fit. No, actually, yeah, the year that he gives. There was no tournament in New Orleans that year. So it was in a different year that Harry remembered. But I think that one was legitimate. That was legitimate piece of advice. And because as Harry said, whenever I saw Hogan after that, he always gave me a big hug.
Okay, so go ahead. I'm sorry. Now we'll fast forward. We'll go back to 1953. I think it was. We were
Well, yeah.
Triple Crown. Yeah.
The great success he had in '53, winning the Hogan Slam, I guess, because he couldn't
Triple
play in the
Crown.
PGA, or yeah, he wouldn't. Yeah, the Triple Crown. He wouldn't have played in the PGA if the calendar had permitted it, because of the demands of all the 36 hole rounds. I guess he started to he probably with his help, the interest was reignited in The Secret. And there was, it ultimately culminated in, I guess, a 1954 Life magazine article where half a dozen pros were asked to give their guess of what The Secret was. And then Hogan revealed what he called The Secret in the 1955 issue, August 8th. And there's also a companion article in Sports Illustrated, same week, August 8th, 1955, also covers the same details. The Sports Illustrated article is authored by Herbert Warren Wind, and the Life article was ghosted by Wind. And that was how the two probably got acquainted, and it became natural for Wind to work with him on 5 Lessons. And as we talked in the 5 Lessons interview that we did a couple of days ago, Wynn obviously knew Hogan very well. If there was any disagreement, what club he had used and what club was in 5 Lessons, he would have heard about it, and he never heard about it. I don't think Hogan wasn't going to confront Wynn with that change in narrative.
But exactly, he wasn't gonna. In a way, I think that Hogan had a way of being enjoying this people's pursuit of his intellectual property or whatever. You know what I mean? He made a game out of it.
I think,
I believe Hogan was laughing at all this stuff.
yeah, right. I agree.
And baiting the public in every which way he could, and sitting there just enjoying it.
Right. Well, I know you interviewed Peter Kessler. I don't know if you got on this topics, but Peter told me that Hogan I guess Peter was close with Tommy Bolt.
Yes.
And what Peter said is Hogan told Tommy Bolt that everything in the Life magazine article was nonsense, that he had to tell them something in order to get paid the $10,000 or whatever it was. So he made this story up, and that's what he told them.
Right.
And but I don't believe it. I don't believe that, because you can trace back the roots. You can trace back the elements of The Secret to his 1948 newspaper column, where there is no reason for him to be making things up. So I disagree I think Hogan was playing with Tommy Bolt and Tommy Bolt's audience there.
Mm. Okay, so a lot of innuendo surrounding this secret. So if we go forward, he starts the Ben Hogan Company, right?
Yeah.
Okay, now commercially, it benefited him to have a secret. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
His brand was
exactly
the ball striking, and his secret to ball striking, and now these impeccably made precision irons. Correct. At some point later on, as generations changed, I think he went into Nicholas's dominance and all this, and Hogan started to lose some traction. I believe that he came back to, whether it was Sports Illustrated, I can't remember which magazine it was, and he offered The Secret. or
Right.
I think it was
The real secret.
$100,000. It was this real secret.
Right.
So it comes back into the news.
Yeah, there aren't a lot of published details on that, but yeah, there are people who recall that he did approach the golf magazines, or maybe just one of them, offered to reveal all, and they couldn't come to an agreement on that.
Right. Sort of like first, the one verse, I heard two verses. One is that he offered the secret for $100,000 and he got flat out turned down. And then the other one
Reject.
was that he asked whatever magazine it was what it was worth to them. And they said it was
Yeah.
75, and it was worth 75 to Hogan. And he said he wanted
Right.
the Ben Hogan company to get 150 for him to reveal this secret. And
Oh,
yeah, it's just, I don't know.
okay. Yeah, that's not. I'm not familiar with the details of that
Those
story.
are two separate versions of this I've
Right.
heard and read that, but it's, and it's more hearsay than anything else. There's nothing, I don't think there's anything
Yeah.
documented on
Right.
this ever
Right.
happening.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So I guess it's safe to, well, okay. So if you went and looked at Hogan in the 40s, so he said Ben Hogan predicted that no one would dominate on the tour after the war except him.
I don't think
I
that's
mean,
true.
he went on winning. He
Predicted
went on a winning rampage post-war. 5 victories in 45, and that's with only 4 months of play. 13 victories in
That's right.
46, 7
Right.
victories in 47, and 10 victories in 48.
Right.
Right. All that
That's
time, I guess the secret was involved. Would it be fair to say?
No, the
I
secret.
mean, I'm sorry.
The secret wasn't.
All that time, he earned all those victories, and then he took a hiatus, or he earned the victories up to 47. Is what the way you're describing it to me. Then he takes a hiatus and comes back in 48 and just tears it up again.
Right.
So he was playing pretty good golf.
Yeah.
Save for a hook here or there.
Oh, well, whatever. Yeah. Well, again, he came back and did have a terrific 45, given that he had to, get back to his tournament.
He got discharged. He just gotten discharged.
Yeah, he got just right. And but 46 was with the Byron Nelson driver. 45 was with the Byron Nelson driver. 46 was with the Byron Nelson driver. And then 47, where he did have 7 victories, and 6 of those, I guess, let's see, I'm not sure whether he'd won before the club broke. He may have won an event before it broke. I can't remember, but he then had his play definitely tailed off when he didn't have the Nelson driver. And then he found the secret, which allowed him to drive the ball perfectly with apparently the drivers that he had available. And then he had that terrific 48, and then won 2 out of 4 events in 49 before the accident.
So we go back to 38. He was playing. How many times did he win the Barton Trophy pre-war?
Well, he won the Barton Trophy in 40 and 41. He had the low stroke average in 42. They didn't give the award because of the war, but he had the low stroke average. 5 Nelson had the low stroke average. And then 46 he had the low stroke average, and 47 Locke had the low stroke average, but then he reclaimed the stroke average in 48.
Okay, so the point I'm trying to get to here is that so far he wasn't this duck hooking hacker that everybody's trying to. The guy was in the top 10. He was a top 10 golfer from 1938 to.
Yeah, I see the point you're trying to make. Yes. Well, This was Hogan playing with people. This is Hogan playing with people, saying that he was in a terrible predicament where he couldn't get the ball airborne. The handwriting, all of that, he couldn't make it on tour. Well, that was describing, 1946 or even 47. That was describing 37 or 1938 or even earlier.
Mm.
Yeah, that was how embellishing to make it a better story. Right. Definitely.
Or Alger's story.
Right. But there was a very, very prominent instructor who I got to know pretty well. And he would talk about Hogan in power golf. And he'd say Hogan was a terrible ball striker at the time power golf was made, and terrible ball striker. And then okay. And then I did my research, and I discovered that he wasn't a terrible ball striker by any means. In fact, what got me kind of interested in this whole Hogan, um, and mystique, I guess, is in 1940 he was being described as one of the best ball strikers on tour, and one of perhaps the best driver in the world. So I went back to my friend who was this instructor. So why did you think that Hogan was such a terrible ball striker when he won all these tournaments? He was Farm Trophy winner. He had all these accolades. He says, well, the Life magazine article. As he says, I was a striker. He says I had a duck hook that you could hang your coat on, and so yeah, he really had an impact on what people's perception by what appeared in this article for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Well, in fact, I've often said one of the most underrated golfers of all time is Hogan of the 1940s.
Yeah. Well, if we look at Irv Schloss and those guys were experimenting with cameras at that point, and there's a video, like I think it was a precursor to Power Golf, and it was done by, I think the gentleman was the president of the PGA of America, and he was also the head pro at Augusta, maybe.
Ed Dudley.
So Ed Dudley goes out with Hogan at Augusta, and the film is wide, the video's cool. And going back to your point, when he said he had the Pro Nation and the cup lifters and all that, I think the difference was trajectory. And if you look at his shots on that particular, that's Power Golf precursor, he was hitting, he was smoking. I mean, you could see the ball the way, but it was coming off on these line drives, like boring type shots that I could see how he might have problems holding the greens. But other than that, the guy was striping the ball. It wasn't like.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. So is there anything else we want to add to the secret?
Well, I guess I'd say if you want to follow Hogan's advice, play with the flat or bowed left wrist until you start hooking it.
Then you can work your way back to the slice to the
Yeah, but people who read the 5 lessons, read this article and how he rolled the club face open, then rolled the club face shut. Well, if you look at how Hogan actually swung, he really wasn't rolling. He wasn't really rolling the club face shut as he came into impact, and that's actually one of the changes. If you familiar with do you have your copy of 5 Lessons handy?
No, I'm in a different place right now, but I still have my original copy of Power Golf. I have to, when we were talking, you saw that big library behind me. That was my apartment in New York. Now I'm in my villa in the Dominican Republic. So behind me.
Oh, really?
Yeah, this is actually the Triple Crown. It's a commemorative edition. So I imagine, per our last discussion, we were talking about he was playing McGregor's.
Yeah.
Oh, this is a Ben Hogan commemorative Triple Crown.
Right.
So it must be a
Right.
knockoff of a McGregor, of the McGregors he was using.
No,
No?
actually, it's not. No, the McGregor didn't have nearly as much weight on the bottom of the
This
club
is,
and had a weight bar in the middle.
okay, these were issued in 93, and they are our
Yeah.
40th anniversary. They're called the Legend, Ben Hogan
Okay.
Legend.
Well,
So I was thinking to myself, wait a second, these can't be copies of the clubs he used. It then never dawned on me
they're
that,
not.
wait a second, when was it? That's why I asked you, when was the Ben Hogan Company founded? So he wouldn't have been playing
Right.
Ben Hogan irons, these legends.
No, the set that he used is in the Ben Hogan room at the USGA
Yeah.
Museum.
Okay.
You're in a case there.
Right. Okay. So, okay. So, I guess we can sign off now. So we get back together and we
I
grab
think
the
it's
next topic.
okay.
Great.
Sounds good.
Once again, it's a pleasure listening to you and picking your brains on this
Thank you.
information. I enjoyed it.
Okay. Well, it's a lot of fun to talk about.
Great.
It was doing the journey was really the enjoyment is getting back to all the historical documents and seeing what was reported at the time. And here you go. You got the secret that wasn't a secret until it
I'll
became.
see, let it go. Right? Anybody can have, so this Lee said, anyone can have a secret
Yes,
as long as they
said,
don't tell anybody. It's a joke. Yeah.
okay. Let's
Okay. All right. We'll
Okay.
catch up again, Jeff. Thank you. Thanks for your time, brother. All
Take
right,
care.
bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks.